The individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he can't believe it exists.
The law is whatever the powers that be in power happen to say it is today. Whatever they say it is, that's what the law is today. And it may change tomorrow.
As people started to live together in societies, there was nothing to prevent individuals from infringing upon the rights and freedoms of each other. Once that happened, there were only two choices: either protect ourselves or elect a group of individuals to protect our rights for us. We chose the latter, and thus law was born to protect our rights and freedoms.
We have no law in America. And understand that. There's a Roman maximum in law that says, "For he that would be deceived, let him." Simply meaning, if you are so ignorant as to be deceived, then that's your business, that's your problem. So you need to do your homework and find out what the words mean, especially in relation to law and government. Because there is a world of occultism that is operating today throughout the world, in which you use certain words, and when those words are used in a court, they don't mean the same thing at all.
Jordan Maxwell speaks about words. Words are definitely his forte. He also speaks about where words come from.
Understanding law and the words of law, there are two things that this planet has: water and earth, water and land. Consequently, there are two kinds of law: the law of the land and the law of water. You've heard the term law of the land, but in point of fact, that's precisely what this word means, law of the land, because it is the people who live on land. And that is opposed to something else called the law of the high seas, or the law of water. You need to understand the difference. The law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on the land. And so consequently, the law of the land is different in every country. You can do things in America you can't do in Russia. You can do things in Africa you can't do in England. So the law of the land is the law of the culture that lives on that particular land. However, there is a higher law that dominates the entire world. It's called the law of the water, or the law of the high seas. The law of water is referred to as the law of money. It doesn't matter what color you are, where you're from, or where you live. Money is money. And anytime you're doing banking or using money, you are now under the law of water, maritime admiralty.
In the film, The Occult World of Commerce, Jordan Maxwell and Jason Whitney give a great overview explaining in depth the important differences between the two law systems, how they were merged, and how this affects how we live today. Countries' laws end at the borders of their land. It's also known as common law, the law of the common people. The proper English common law was originally based on the Ten Commandments section of the Old Testament of the Christian Bible, but it's also considered to be common sense law. The common law that's developed over time has but one purpose. That sole purpose is to protect our fundamental rights and freedoms of life, liberty, and property. The purpose of law was never to restrict or destroy our rights and freedoms. Its sole purpose, then and now, is for the preservation and protection of these gifts.
There are two different kinds of law. There is civil law, which is the law of the land, and there is UCC, which is maritime law. UCC stands for Uniformed Commercial Code, which was created thousands of years ago by the Phoenician Canaanites.
Marine law, the law of water, is the law of money, or currency. It is the law that governs all money in the world, and is the same type of law in every country with a central bank. It is also known as commercial law, covering all forms of commerce. You may not have heard of the Uniform Commercial Code, or the UCC, but it is the foundation of how all modern financial transactions are handled, and while very complex, understanding it gives a great insight as to how the banking game is played.
The entities who created this system understood that they could not control you, the flesh and blood you, but if they turned you into a corporation under the UCC law, then they would effectively be able to have that control.
Because the government created a situation when we're in perpetual debt, but that is unlawful. So they also gave us a remedy, a solution to fix it, but they hid it from us.
Whenever we're dealing in a business, then all countries and all corporations work under UCC.
Throughout history, law has been corrupted and used in many ways it was never intended to be used. Laws have also been created to control and enslave people for the sole benefit of those in power. Before the implementation of marine law, which was layered to exist over our already existing common law, in the United States of America, people were called sovereigns. That is, you were your own country. You were considered a soul, created by God, and you were born and owned your own body. Instead of a first and a last name, like you have today, you had what was called a Christian and family name. Not only did you own your own body, but you were completely responsible for it. You could use any substance you wished to your own benefit or peril. If two men consented to having a gunfight in the streets, to the death, it was their right as long as it was consensual. The sheriff would stand by to make sure no innocents got injured in what was a perfectly legal duel. Self-responsibility was the order of the day, which was either a blessing or a curse to the people. Common law ruled the land. Treat others the way you want to be treated, the real golden rule. Now, under common law, all interactions with your fellow man were and are some form of contract and consent. There were fewer layers of law in existence before the merging of common and marine law, and so, for example, there was no such thing as fraud, because as a sovereign who was personally responsible, at any time you could have said no. People had to be more diligent in who they dealt with, and thus, as reputation was actually considered important, people would try and honor their contracts and earn an honest living, using the court systems only for criminal prosecutions or contract disputes. Simpler times back then indeed, but also more primitive as well. Perhaps we're learning to say no again.
And if you look at the whole entire picture, the government is only your representative and representatives of your neighbors. So who are they to demand that you get a license in order to engage in an action which is fundamentally lawful?
If we don't make a stand, I mean, the reason that these guys have the power they have is because we don't say anything. It's this whole tacit agreement thing. And, you know, because we didn't stand up and make claims to stop the authorities from doing what they do, they've just sort of taken over. And so we're all running scared because we don't realize that all we have to do is say no.
You need to understand there's legal and lawful, and there's illegal and unlawful. Legal means you are operating correctly by the form or by the letter of the law. Lawfully tends to speak to the spirit of the law as opposed to the letter of the law.